Hi, everyone. Warm autumn greetings from the Bay Area where I am, where fall has definitely descended. And thanks for being here. Thanks for coming on our Trauma-Sensitive Mindfulness meetup call. This has been total highlight for me this year. I had a friend of mine that suggested this idea of basically just creating a monthly meetup chance to be with you all here in the community, meet people who are engaged and interested in this topic. And so thanks for being here. This is a great chance to get to be in dialogue, hear what's really cooking for folks. And for you all, what I've learned is also to get to meet some of each other. It's kind of a niche topic in some ways, though it's getting more popular around the intersection of trauma and mindfulness. And I enjoy the chance for you all to get to also be in community as well. So for those of you that are new to this call, this is Trauma-Sensitive Mindfulness Meetup. And typically with these calls, an hour-long call, I will lead through a guided practice, opening trauma-sensitive practice. At some point in the meeting, we'll do a breakout room of some kind, which just gives you the chance to be in smaller groups with each other, to be in dialogue. Those are totally optional. And generally, I also talk about a specific topic that I've been chewing on. I have a couple thoughts of things that I want to talk about, but I left this session just open for you all to just get to ask any questions that have been on your mind, be in dialogue about any number of issues. I'll raise a couple things that we might talk about, but really this is your time. It's your time to get to discuss whatever's on your mind. So with that said, if any housekeeping things is, if you have any questions, I'll be opening it up at some point just for us to all talk. And if at any point you have a question that you'd like to stay anonymous, you're welcome to chat Tyler, or you can chat me too. So my colleague Tyler is on the call. And if you go into the chat box, you'll find Tyler in there. He's the co-host, and you can chat him and just say, hey, I'd like this question to be anonymous. So you're also welcome to do that. Okay, so let's start with some practice. Yeah, just invite you to find any posture that works for you tonight or this morning. I know some of you are in different time zones. And if you like, the invitation is to take a couple of deeper breaths here. If that feels dysregulating at all, you can just let go of the breath. And otherwise, just a couple deeper and slow breaths to help your body fully arrive here on the call in this moment. And then just spending a moment finding an anchor point that would help you to find a little stability of attention here. So some of you might be in traditions where you're working with the breath. It could be sensations of the breath coming in and out of the nostrils, or the rising and falling of the chest or abdomen. Or you could also work with different anchor points in the body. That might be sensations connected to the feet on the ground, or the buttocks in the chair, or if you're standing, your feet touching the earth. Or it also might just be the hands pressed together on the thighs, but you can also ground in sensation here. Or you might choose an anchor that's completely outside of yourself. This is something we get to practice. So that might be having your eyes open and letting your attention settle on something in your surrounding environment. Or it could also be sound or hearing what's around you right now. Again, all is an invitation to come into more and more full presence with yourself, your environment, with each other here on the call. And then I want to invite us just for a minute as an optional practice of some form of self-touch. This has become a a part of the trauma-sensitive practice I'm doing is sometimes making contact with ourselves can feel regulating, supportive, caring, nourishing. That might be by hands on the face, or a hand on the chest by the heart, or on the belly, or on the forehead. Or it could just be something as simple as the hands together. I've also been practicing a hand at the base of at the back of the neck, around the base of the skull, which can be very settling for the nervous system for some of us, not for everyone. And then the invitation with the self-touch is just to be with that contact. It's, you are both the one who's making contact and the one receiving contact. You can lean into any side of that equation, whether that's, letting yourself feel the contact, or also being the one who's making contact, extending care. And just taking another moment or two here with that practice. And then we'll start shifting to transitioning from this brief opening meditation. And whatever way feels right for you, that might be a little bit of movement. Or just with that touch, really just acknowledging, okay, we're going to be shifting here, but we can always come back anytime on the call. You can come back to that anchor and that contact. And then letting yourself just come back into connection here with all of you. John, I see your really cute cat there in front of you. I love when cats come into the into these meditations. So good. Let's actually do this. I just as a way to begin, I'm actually going to suggest we start with the breakout rooms here as a way to just sort of start warming up with each other and introducing ourselves. And again, for those of you that are newer, we'll come back. We'll have some time to be in dialogue and conversation. But really part of the call here is community building. It's a chance for you to get to meet people who are doing this work in many different environments. And I've really enjoyed learning about some of the different places that you're offering this work, whether one-to-one or you're working in groups with veterans in prisons or any kind of mindfulness group. So in a moment, you're going to receive an invitation into a breakout room. It's an optional practice. If you want to just take a break, you can stay here in the main room. And the invitation for this breakout room is just to introduce yourself and briefly say where you tend to apply this work. It could be in your own practice. It could be with specific people or groups, but just let your little group know, this is my name, this is how I use the practice. And just do a brief round first to introduce yourselves, how you use the practice. And then I want to invite you to spend just a minute each saying, either here's a question I'm in, or here's what I'm curious about inside this work, especially if you're new to it. But just a moment for you to get to share, here's what I'm coming to the call with, here's what questions I'm in or the learning that I'm in. And then we'll come back to the call. In a moment, I just want to open it up to whatever was cooking inside of your smaller groups about what questions are you in, what's inspiring you. And I have a couple things that I'd love to touch base on during the call, but I want to open up to you here. For those that are new to this group, we've been doing this now. I think this is the 5th or the 6th meetup group. So we've covered a bunch of different topics. We took a dive into social context. We looked at anchors one time. We did a really deep dive into body scans. We talked about languaging in the space. So generally every month that we're coming together, we're trying to come at it from a different angle. And as we go forward, I'm going to try to bring on more and more kind of special guests, people that I think that you would enjoy learning from, and just great folks who are doing work in this area. So for this call, the intention is really just to open it up to all of you. And my one request before you unmute yourself to talk is, if you're someone who have been on calls before, if you've had the chance to ask questions, just to allow people who haven't had the chance first to jump in, just so we can be in the practice of really sharing the mic with each other. And And that's all I was going to say. So, oh, one more thing. If you have an anonymous question, you can ask Tyler. You can just find Tyler, who's the co-host, in the chat windows. So does anyone have anything they want to say about what's inspiring you, what's challenging you, questions that you're in? We'll just open it up to all of you. Or what work are you doing? Really want to take time. Hey, Hillary.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. How you doing?
Good. So I have this question that came out of another session that I did with the other group, the online course, about other kinds of dysregulation that cause hypo and hyperarousal. And when we don't necessarily, if we're looking at signs that people are, that they might be outside that window of tolerance and might be in one of these other places, is it important that we know why?
Yeah. That's such a great question. Let me just, for those that don't know the terms, I appreciate, so you're in the course. We're doing, for those that don't know, we're doing at the moment, we're in an online course where I think we're 3 weeks into it now. So Hillary, thanks for being in the course. And for those that don't know that part of the trauma-sensitive work, we talk about a window of tolerance, meaning that there is a zone of what you could call energy or autonomic arousal, where people are often, where it's safe for them to practice. And if people start really getting out of what's called the window of tolerance, practice becomes a little more challenging, a little more difficult. And for those of us practicing trauma-sensitive mindfulness, being able to recognize signs that someone is out of their window can be a helpful flag that can go up for us, like, oh, I might want to have a conversation. Just to be clear, I'm not saying if someone's out of their window that means that something bad's happening or that mindfulness won't help them, but it's an important flag and first step for us. So that's a little bit of the background. And Hillary, if I hear your question right, it was like, does it matter why someone is dysregulated? Is that right? We're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. So my first answer would be no, though I think that can be still very useful to have some content and context about what's happening for someone. And the reason I say no, and I talk about this more in coursework, is there's a really important choice point. If someone comes to us and says, I'm feeling super spun out by this practice, I'm having flashbacks, I feel dissociated, whatever's happening for them, I feel like there's a choice point for us where we could get into the why and really start to ask questions like, well, why are you feeling that way? Or what happened for you? The other way we can go is to actually just more get curious about their nervous system and what's happening for them inside of their practice. So I tend to go more towards what are the modifications or support we can offer people, irrespective of the why and the content. And I find we can get bogged down, or at least I can, in, well, like, what happened to them and why are they here? Now that can be really important at some point. Maybe they're really depressed, and that would be useful for us to know. But I think at first blush, heading towards the how are things working for them in their practice as opposed to the why is a more effective and a more useful place to look up front. That's my answer though. How's that land for you, Hillary?
Pretty well. Yeah, I think that it's that is always I guess a choice point to, like, when to ask what's going on and when to just offer, well, you could try this, or what about if we try that, and you could, like, and you can give me some feedback. And if I'm working one-on-one with somebody, or even if I'm in a class situation, you know, and I might talk to somebody beforehand if I noticed that they were agitated, or they wrote to me and said, I'm having trouble with this practice. And I say, well, why don't you try this during class, and then let me know how it goes afterward. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And sometimes I might want to say, you know, do you want to talk to me about what's happening, or give me some background? And then you have to kind of figure out when is the right time to do those two different things. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're working without knowing your context, if you're doing more one-to-one work with people, that might be a container that can actually hold the story. And then I work with a lot of people here who are doing group work, who maybe say, wow, I don't have the space to get into the deep content, but let me see what's happening for their body and nervous system in the practice. So yeah, I think you're right. It's totally context specific, and picking and choosing where those moments are to ask. So yeah, thanks for the question. That's a really appreciate your question. Yeah.
Thanks. Anyone else want to jump in with a comment, question?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm Dana. Hi.
Hi, Dana.
Hi. So I appreciate you doing these. I love them when I can jump on, and also I have watched some of the recordings. But I am realizing that when you say practice, I'm confused. Is there like are you specifically talking about like a certain practice that you teach people to do, or how we are bringing trauma-sensitive mindfulness into our practice?
Yes, more of a latter. So when I talk about practice, I'm typically referring to the ways that mindfulness is being practiced in a more mainstream way, which my assessments is it's often around a noting practice or a Vipassana practice, an insight tradition. It could also be a body scan practice or one of the major mindfulness programs. I feel like mindfulness is being practiced in so many different ways, and the term means so many different things. But when I'm saying practice, I'm really trying to focus on any time that we are asking anyone to be paying that kind of close and sustained attention to their present moment experience. Mm-hmm. So there's a pretty big umbrella, and I realize there's a whole diverse range of practitioners here inside of this group. Some who are working in Zen, some who are, many inside of a secular context. So I'm trying to say that that's the whole umbrella, but it's really that moment of asking someone to pay close and sustained attention. Does that answer your question?
Totally. I'm glad I'm not missing the practice. So
yeah, no, there's no. You mean like some special practice? And I wish I had that. I don't have that. No, I mean more like what are the modifications? Which is mostly what I'm doing in my work, is to say that act of asking people to pay that close attention is so powerful. What are the modifications in a more general sense that we could apply? And then in these calls, I think we get a little bit more specific. Some people say, hey, I work with veterans, I work in prisons, I work in a hospital. How do we tailor that inside of our practices? But I'm saying that more as a general umbrella. So thanks for asking. I'm sure other people have that question too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Yeah. Hey, Brent.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Brent.
Yeah, I saw your face before. Good to see you again.
I think I know my own fairly precise definition, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the distinction between mindfulness and meditation.
Yeah, I'd love to. There's actually someone on the call who works very closely with Shinzen Young, who is that you?
Teacher.
Oh, cool. So someone sent this paper. I'm wondering if anyone wants to text it to the whole group here. I just saw this paper recently from Shinzen Young that was talking about, I think it was 8 different definitions of mindfulness.
Yeah. What is it's like a 76-page paper.
Yeah. Which was like, wow. It really I'd recommend it for those of you that are interested in just coming at it from many different angles. I think it was like mindfulness, the fad, mindfulness, the practice, mindfulness, the state of awareness. It just came at it from so many different angles. So thanks, Shinzen, and thanks to your whole community for doing that. And then, I'm sorry, getting back to you were asking about practice, how I would define. I'm sorry, how
the distinction between meditation and mindfulness.
Yes, right. Well, I try to make sure in any teaching that I'm doing to make that distinguishment up close or up front, that mindfulness, the state of awareness, would definitely be distinct from mindfulness, the actual practice. So I'm holding mindfulness practice as the cultivation of the state of awareness that can happen through mindfulness. In other words, if mindfulness is like a muscle or a power of mind, I would see mindfulness practices the place where we're exercising that muscle and really cultivating it. And I have deep respect for those that are so deep in, like Shinzen writing this 76-page paper on, let's get really nuanced about it. But I'd say for us here, the main distinction I'd want to make is mindfulness itself, the mindful awareness does not often cause issues for people struggling with trauma. Actually, it's incredibly helpful, that ability to know what's happening in the moment without any kind of added commentary. that power of the mind and awareness is so useful for people struggling with trauma. Where I've seen in my research, the people getting into trouble, who are getting stuck, where I think research is also starting to evoke this, is the practice, is that moment where people are applying teachings, whether through on retreat, it could be through an app, all those different methods, as Dana and I, we were just talking about. That's really the place that I see people running into problems or trouble. So most of my work is focusing on the practice, and where I distinguish, which we could call, for some people, meditation, but also body scans, different things. So does that answer your question here? Cool. Anything you'd add, being, in the work you're in? Or?
Having absorbed so much of Shinzen's stuff, and he's so persnickety and precise about all of his definitions, I think what it's boiled down to me is mindfulness is the result of the exercise, and meditation is simply one of the exercises that can build that muscle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
they do get collapsed a lot. I mean, I'm guilty of that too. As a shorthand, I'll collapse it and find myself getting a little lazy.
Sure, it's very difficult to put out there in a short, concise definition.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Raising. I'm sure others had it too. Yeah, Mary Beth, I see you. Oh, you got to unmute yourself. Here, let me unmute you. I can do it. There you go. Go for it.
I should know that by now. Sorry. So I've been on the call only once before, so I'm not sure.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this has already been addressed, but I teach, I'm an MBSR teacher, and I teach in basically to the general population, but also specifically substance abuse counselor. So a lot of those people, have been traumatized. And again, that's like an interesting word. How do you know what qualifies as that? But my question is this: if someone has not meditated before, has not practiced in a formal way mindfulness, and now in an attempt to be sensitive to trauma, do you give them a verbal kind of prompt, like, if such and such and such and such happens while you're practicing, you may want to let me know that, because I teach in groups, but I also teach individually. Yeah. So I'm a little confused as to not wanting to trigger anything like, oh, this could be wrong, because there's such a broad experience of what happens in practice for people. And yet, do we want to alert them to, like, hey, if you start having flashbacks, you should let me know? Or do we not say anything at all and just be really sensitively tuned into their experiences?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think it's a really important one. And this, to me, is there's the art and the science of this. This really gets to the art of how do we, in any of the rooms that we're in or the people that we're teaching, how to both raise that possibility, but not to be overly suggestible to the point that people start going, oh boy, is something bad about to happen? How do we find that balance point? So I'd say two things. One is I would leave it to all of you, of course, based on your group, your context. So you're in mindfulness-based stress reduction, doing work around addiction, so particular context. And so you will all find your way, I think, of how do you want to raise that up front. And having said that, I think, Mary Beth, what you're pointing to is one of the most powerful and effective things that we can do up front, especially if we're in a program, is to actually somehow communicate that if you're having an experience that you're finding destabilizing or difficult beyond something, like, it's okay to be uncomfortable. Don't want to make that wrong at all. And if you're at a point where you're actually feeling somehow over your head or you're having difficulty, I want you to know you can come and you can approach me. I think that one sentence can be such a game changer from all the people that I've talked to and interviewed now over the last number of years. Is we talked about this on one of the calls about compliance, that when we're a meditation teacher or a clinician, that there's this background of compliance where people will be wanting to please us as an authority figure. And the number of stories I heard of people who said, I was having a really hard time and I didn't know what or how to say it because I felt like everyone else was having a good time. I didn't want to disappoint the teacher. So I do think being able to say up front, hey, I just want to put that out there without fear mongering. Because to me, the whole point of this practice is to increase our strength and capacity to be with challenge, to be with difficulty, and to not just suggest, oh, this is going to create problems. So I think it's just a one line. Josh just wrote the key phrase. So I think Josh was saying the one line. So it could be something like, everyone, I want you, by the way, there'll be a recording of this. I don't know what I said, but if I just want you to know that this is a powerful practice, what we're going to be offering. If at any point you ran into a challenge or a difficulty that you felt you needed some support with, I just want you to know it's okay to talk to me about it. You can let me know. Just something as simple, a little touch point like that, especially at the front end, can really make a big difference. So how's that land for you, Mary Beth? Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. It was the
Cool.
fear that I was afraid of, kind of having misgivings, but yeah.
Absolutely. And people have come to me and said they did that and they didn't want that to happen. They said, actually using the word trauma, I think, up front can be very evocative for people. Like, hey, if you have a history of trauma, I think the use of the word trauma in a program up front, I don't think that's useful. I just think challenges, difficulties is more laying the foundation for someone to know that they can approach us. So appreciate the question, and feel free, always circle back in a month or two. Let us know how it's going in there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for your work. Is it Gaia?
Gayatri.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi, David. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you for doing this. So I had a question. So I've been teaching, again, mindfulness in various contexts for adult groups and teen groups, and now in senior facilities, and also in the workplace. So one of the practices that you're probably familiar with, so I got certified with Jack Kornfield and Tara Brock in the recent, the MMTCP program that was run by Sounds True. And so I've been, using some of those methods to teach. And one of the practices that you're probably familiar with is the RAIN practice, where you go recognize, allow, investigate, and nourish with self-compassion. It's one of those, I think Tara does quite a bit of that. So, and I found that practice to be very effective in certain communities, certain groups. But it's again, one of those practices where you invite people to remember and recollect a difficult situation or something that was challenging for them. And then they kind of replay it in their minds, bring it into their bodies. And then you work with them to stay present with the sensations and then investigate and get underneath. And it can be very healing. But I wonder if practices like that are probably not very helpful for people who have, and usually I say something like, okay, on a difficulty scale of 0 to 10, pick something that's a 4 or 5.
Good idea.
I kind of do that to kind of help people. But I wonder if if there's ways to kind of work around some of these sort of to make it more trauma sensitive, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually hadn't heard of, so this RAIN acronym, for those who haven't heard, want to make sure everyone has it. So remember, recognize, accept, investigate, and then is it not? No.
Nourish with self-compassion, usually. So I end with self-compassion, which is but it could also be rest in neutral awareness or natural awareness. I mean, that N could be a couple of different things, but
that's right.
I use the N for compassion because that's it's amazing. Easier to kind of like close it and make it all warm and nice again at the end of it, rather than sort of leave them, with something difficult at the end. So
it's so interesting. I learned about the one that I learned it was non-judgment.
Yeah.
A while back. So it's just changed. And I see someone, Denise, thanks for throwing. So it's allow. So recognize, allow, investigate, non-identify. Yes.
Non-identify. Yeah.
So this is a really interesting, so this thing about using RAIN, for example, using I'd say a competency of mindfulness, which I love the way it's broken down with RAIN, to work with difficulty. I mean, I think this is a really interesting topic of when would we purposefully invite someone or a group of people that we're working with to really actively be in difficulty, and is that trauma sensitive? Yeah. I think this is a really, I don't have the easy answer for it. I'm mostly just happy to be in the inquiry with you. I've also worked with, for those that are familiar with mindful self-compassion, mindful self-compassion program also will have moments of purposely working with challenge and difficulty. And I think it's to be done cautiously. I think it can be incredibly effective and useful, and to me, a very rewarding part of practice, and to do it well. So let me say two things about it. One is just to back up to this window that we talked about at the front. So if we have this window of what we're calling window of tolerance, where people can be really more easily present with their experience, trauma will tend to shrink people's window of arousal. So less and less stimulus will cause more and more challenge, difficulty, or dysregulation. And to me, the point of mindfulness practice is to support all of us to be increasing the size of our window of tolerance, so we can be with more and more. So I think, Gayatri, the practice of actually working with skillfully a 4 or a 5 out of 10 to really work that edge can be very, very effective. The question I'd have for you in it is, do you feel like you have the capacity inside of whatever room you're in to track people through the duration of their experience, including after? And what I mean by that is, if you're working people near the edges of their window with rain, do you feel like you're having the chance on the other side to go around and say, let me just check in, are they back? Are they regulated? Did it make it more dysregulated or worse? I think that'd be my main question back to you is, are you actually able to see them through that wave? Because I think it can be useful, and it's advanced. It can be advanced to be doing that work. So
yes. Yeah. So I think for me, I do circle back with the group after the practice to see, how everyone is at the end, and whether that last step of self-compassion kind of has helped, kind of regulate and bring some level of kindness to whatever is there. So I do that. But for example, I hesitate to do this in a work setting. For example, I teach in some of these, offices, because at the end of it, they're going to have to get up and go and do their work, and they're not. So I don't want to leave them in that state of heightened sensitivity, or with something that's difficult that they've been sort of playing out in their minds. So I'm careful about where I do these practices. But I do come back at the end and ask them what and to see, and if people are okay. Yeah,
it's such a great topic. I mean, I feel like we could do actually a whole meetup on this this topic of how to lead people purposefully into more challenge or difficulty, and to do it in a trauma sensitive way. And what you're saying to me is the key question of, what's the context and the container? Has it been built? I mean, the question earlier from Mary Beth, has there been a container set where if someone had challenge, they could come and talk to you after? And so I appreciate you're looking there. And the thing that you're saying about the checkout, that's the one main encouragement I'd have for all of us, if you're walking through a practice like that, is to do some form of social engagement on the other side of it. Now, you're doing self-compassion, which I think is fantastic and useful. And whether that would be through a 1 or 2 word checkout with a group, if you're working with a group, or even doing a dyad or triad practice for people to get to regulate through connection. I think that can also be very regulating for people on the other side. Not always, but
this is also true, for example, with forgiveness practices, for example. When you bring up and you say, okay, you do forgiveness, I mean, again, you're bringing up something difficult and things that you hold. So there's many such practices that kind of evoke or purposefully evoke those memories and situations, and then work.
Thanks for bringing that in, Gayatri. Yeah. Hey, Denise, can I bring you in here? I don't know if this was you that just read, this is about the difference between trauma sensitive and stress sensitive. I love that distinction. And I'm wondering if you'd be open to talking about it for a moment. Here, I'm going to unmute you. There you go. Or maybe you don't want to. Oh, I'm sorry, your mic isn't working. Oh, okay. Well, you can keep chatting us here. I love that distinction around, there is a difference between trauma sensitive and stress sensitive. And it makes me think of the context that Gayatri just naming around work. But if you want to chat more into the box here, I'd love to hear more.
David, I have a question.
Yeah, Wendy.
Well, first of all, I want to comment on the whole, you were talking with Mary Beth about her question and talked about how we label things. And I do yoga therapy and like very much working with trauma, and it's everywhere. So you end up working with it one way or the other.
Right.
But one of the things that I have been advised is to offer classes for anxiety, because a lot of people will say, I have anxiety, but not many people like to admit they have trauma, or they don't recognize their experiences as trauma, but it surfaces that way. So that's one thing. But my question is, so I have a really good friend who has been doing really amazing trauma work for a number of years, and has just recently said that she's going to stop because of the secondary trauma that she's getting from the work. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about self-care in this work, so that we can take care of ourselves as well. And I mean, I'm just kind of starting my journey on this, and it just makes me sad to see somebody who's so gifted leaving because of that issue.
Yep. Oh, that's real.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that in. Yeah. It took not too long of doing any kind of teaching around this topic to realize that, oh, right. I mean, it's all of our own histories will be here, our own experiences with trauma, also people that we're close to that have experienced. It's just like it's here, it's in the room, and it takes a toll. It can take a toll, and so that for many of the people I'm working with, we're doing the practices also for our own care, to stay in, to strengthen our window. And so to me, I'm with you. I'm in it. This is the long-term conversation of how do we take care of ourselves. The one thing that came to mind that was most useful for me is when I meet the communities of people. I mean, even here, one of the, I have a friend and colleague who's been on these calls and who comments like, wow, there's a high degree of sensitivity within this group. That's been my sense. It's been 4 or 5 months doing this, and people are quite attuned, sensitive to each other in this group. So my overall assessment of the community is it's a group of people who are quite sensitive to other humans, to trauma. There's a lot of care and compassion. And I was working with a woman named Babette Rothschild. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she does trauma specialist, and she talks about an empathy dial. Have you heard of this?
No.
It was really helpful for me. She was just saying like, yeah, when we're working with trauma, it will have impact. We're often very empathic people. I mean, just this moment with you, I'm like, it just seems like you're a deeply sensitive person. And she has this idea of an actual dial of empathy, and raises the inquiry for all of us. Would it be possible / useful for those of us working closely with trauma to actually turn down slightly even our empathy dial? And that what she'd found over 20 years of clinical work is that a number of the trauma professionals she worked with tended to have their empathy dial up at an 8 or a set, like we're very empathic, and that actually they could be as effective as a professional clinician or whatever role they're in by turning the dial down. It didn't mean that they would actually disconnect, but they needed to actually turn it down a little bit. And Babette's suggestion is to find anchor points in the body that can help you do that. So I'll say for me, when I did it, and then I'll turn it back to you, is I did find a couple moments being really overwhelmed in my work, and I had to start learning how to feel my back in my work, whether it was one-to-one work or conversations. I'd just remember like, okay, can I feel my back, have my empathy dial at a 4 or a 5, and still be totally present for this person? And that helped me be a lot more sustainable over a number of years. And it's just one practice of many that I want to be doing on these calls, but empathy dial has been really helpful for me. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? Or?
Well, and I think collaboration too.
Oh yeah.
Maybe having people that you can reflect back to. I live in a pretty rural area, so I don't really have a lot of people around me who are doing this work. So I guess that's maybe part of the reason that she got out of it too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That collaboration, colleagues like understand what it's like to be working with trauma.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm glad you're here. Actually at the end of I'm going to leave the Zoom room open here. after the call. So if there's anyone that wants to hang around and just be in conversation, the room will be open for an extra 15, 20 minutes. So if you wanted to stay, just an invitation to just like be connecting with other colleagues around this. It'd be great to have you. Yeah. Thanks, Wendy.
David?
Yeah, I think we have time for one more.
Okay. So the empathy dial is great. It's a name to something that I had to do a long time ago. I'm also a hospice social worker, and having to, I call it boundaries, right? So,
that's another word for it there.
Set healthy boundaries and say, you know, I've got to go into a home, hold the hand of the dying, and then drop that when I walked out of the house. If not, when I first started, I would be, you know, in the shower and clumps of hair coming out of my head because I was so upset. So that was learned a long time ago. And now it is just exponentially more important now that I'm doing this kind of work. But I was going to say earlier is my work with veterans is difficult. And I also have PTSD from my service. And, you know, being able to balance that in a room with other veterans has been difficult, and it's a learning curve, and I didn't do it right this time, but I learned something, and I'm going to do it right better next time.
Great.
So, you know, just learning those boundaries and learning what works and what doesn't work for you, because what works for me definitely doesn't work for everybody.
I mean, I really appreciate bringing in the boundaries piece. And I'll say that as someone who, I've talked about this on the call, but as someone who's raised Canadian, and tends to be like very appeasing, which is not all Canadians, but I just got shaped really deeply to just be kind of saying yes and not have solid boundaries. And one of the things I learned in this work too is that my saying yes to everyone was not creating trust and safety. Like if I didn't have my boundaries, they felt like they couldn't trust my yeses, trust my nos. And so I just appreciate you bringing in, yes, we all need to work our boundaries. And thanks for your work too. I'm glad that you found us. And I'm going to move towards closing our call here. And I have actually a kind of call out and request to the community, which is I'm starting to do some research around an EEG device known as Muse. Some of you might have heard of this. This is it's being kind of marketed as a device for meditation to be getting basically biofeedback in the moment of what a sense would be, you could say, energy or arousal. And I'm starting to do I've had some interesting conversations with people about how they're finding their experience with, in this case, it's Muse. I know there's some other examples where you put this band on your forehead and you're getting some information right away. So I don't have time to do it on this call, but I'm in a learning conversation about how this maps onto states of arousal inside of traumatic stress, and have had a couple people say, I'm getting rewards from the Muse work, but actually I feel like I'm dissociated. And I feel like I'm really checked out and hypo-aroused. So I'm trying to do a little bit more research here. And my request is, if any of you have either worked with the Muse, this app, or you have opinions on it, or you know any research on it, I'm going to put my email in here. So if you'd be open to writing me, I'd just love to hear from you. And I just wanted to put that out as a request to the community here. Len, why don't we end with a little quick sit? Why don't we just end with a moment to come back to our opening practice with each other. So we had kind of come into this call with working around some self-touch, or also working with an anchor, but just want to invite you to take a moment to come back into connection with any resource, anchor, or form of self-touch, which would help you really support an integration of this session that we've been in here. This is kind of be evocative topic to just talk about trauma and mindfulness, and to take a moment and really both come into presence and also notice how you're doing as we end the call. And if you're making any form of contact with yourself through self-touch, you can keep that there for a few breaths. And if you like, a few deeper breaths, so just to support presence, connection, and also supporting our transition here off of the call. And the next few breaths will be shifting back in. And just want to thank all of you for being here.